Hi, I'm Dan Ciamatero, writer and artist of Snot-Ball Comix and lifelong Superman superfan. I've watched, listened to, read, or played just about every version of this classic story on offer, and I can stay silent no more. Because when it comes to the two most recent big screen adaptations, only one of them has any business calling itself a Superman movie, and it ain't even close. So get your gloves on, kiddies, because this guy is coming out swinging.
Snot-Ball Comix dives deep into
For damn near 100 years now, American audiences have thrilled to the cyclical resurgence of their most resilient cultural hero, the Man of Steel, Superman. Through most of the 20th century, as each generation was introduced to this classic story through the mediums and technologies of their time, the character, his adventures, and the world he inhabits remained as recognizable and unchanging as his iconic red and blue uniform. Decade after decade, from radio to television to big screen blockbuster and back again, Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter for a great metropolitan newspaper, would wink at us from behind his stupid glasses as Lois, Jimmy, and Mr. White remained just out of reach of the secret that we all knew. A secret that each new Superman shared with the last, separated by a brief but respectable period of cultural slumber before an inevitable reset would thrust him back into relevance for another series of high-flying adventures. However, by the turn of the new millennium, things were starting to change, and the time-honored formulas were beginning to show their age. From Smallville's no tights, no flights, don't call me Superboy, to the aggressively derivative snooze fest known as Superman Returns, which managed to do all the right things in all the wrong ways, while still cramming in a fourth-quarter game-changer of its own with a crappy Superboy nobody asked for. So, while our hero stumbled through misfire after misfire, the genre around him was going fucking gangbusters. And by the time DC's Dark Knight trilogy and Marvel's every character ever were dominating the box office, it was beginning to look like comic book's first superhero would be left out to dry with his underoos. For longtime fans, this looked like the perfect opportunity to rescue the character from the impossibly long shadow of Christopher Reeve and cast him in the most comic-accurate interpretation to date. For longtime haters, on the other hand, the time had long since passed for a gritty makeover. A chance to ditch everything that makes the character recognizable this side of his laser beam eyes and finally transform him into what he should have been the whole time, namely the Punisher in a cape. As luck would have it, however, cooler heads would ultimately prevail, and the fans would at long last have a Superman worthy of decades of comic book adventures. One that embraced even the most whimsical elements of the Silver and Bronze Ages. But not before a disaster porn enthusiast with a gladiator kink would drain all the color from the hero and hurl him into a grungy snuff film, unleashing the single most insufferable fraternity of sniveling tough boys that fandom has ever seen. This is the story of two movies, their place at the proverbial table, and the raving fans who demand they be given a throne when they barely deserve the kiddie seats. When drawing a comparison between two movies, the obvious first step would be to address the basics. structure, pacing, cinematography, the fact that admittedly Henry Cavill should be the perfect Superman. And admittedly, I've admitted that. Now, let me show you why it's totally irrelevant. For starters, subjectively, both of the movies in question are pretty well crafted. But more important, objectively, only one of these movies is an actual Superman movie, and it isn't the one that's ashamed to use the character's name in the title. And that's really all there is to say about it. The Man of Steel is simply not a Superman movie. It's a Zack Snyder movie, profoundly embarrassed by the source material and wrapped in a burgundy cape. From the first frame of grungy film, everything about the character and his world are weighed against and transmogrified by the director's own personal agenda. History and tradition be damned. To put it in a cultural context that could be better understood, Man of Steel is to Superman what The Last Jedi is to Star Wars. And that is not just a provocative statement, it is a matter of undeniable fact. For those of you balling your fist or rolling your eyes, I brought receipts. So please, turn your attention to Exhibit A. And I rest my case. Both of these sequences serve the same purpose in their respective franchises, and both send the exact same message. This doesn't belong to you anymore. It's mine now, and I'll do with it what I please. In both cases, something symbolically linked to the existing fan base is ruthlessly and unceremoniously ejected in an unnecessary scene with zero ambiguity of intent. And for those of you continuing to insist that these are just the expected outcomes of adaptation, I would point out that everything, altered or omitted in this film, reads like a checklist of grievances from every Spawn or Wolverine fan who thinks Superman isn't cool. Superman doesn't kill? Well, this one does. His secret identity is lame and unbelievable? Okay, we'll just write it out of the movie. His arch nemesis doesn't lend himself well to smashy fistfights? Don't worry about it. We'll just send in a second stringer to do the job for him. His best friend is a freckled-faced teen in a bow tie. Let's shoot him in the fucking face. All of these elements wound up on the cutting room floor. And not in a way that says, keep an open mind, but in a way that screams, you know where to stick it, and you know how much pressure to apply. And most importantly of all, Snyder fans all know this to be true. In most cases, they revel in it. So you can miss me with your surprise and indignation, since it's all hanging out there, pink and naked. So sure, I've been dogging pretty hard on Man of Steel for its sins of infidelity. An advantage, by the way, that I intend to press, since proving a Superman movie that is trying not to be a Superman movie is in fact not a Superman movie is like shooting fish in a barrel. However, there is one crime against the lore that is perpetrated by every modern interpretation that comes along. That's the insistence on letting Lois in on the secret way too early. A plot contrivance that is both stupid and sucks. Yet they all do it, and these two movies are as guilty as anybody else. But By comparing these two scenes from each movie, you'll find that while Zack Snyder is a willing accomplice to this crime, Mr. Gunn serves as its quick-witted alibi, playfully juggling audience expectation to get the best bang for his comic book buck. You see, in Superman 25, this scene, which comes before the Lois Lane reveal, is a stand-in for this scene, or this scene, or this scene. See some patterns here? These scenes provide a warm, comfortable hub for all the Superman action. They are the same generation after generation, creating a familiar environment for both old fans and new ones alike. Conversely, this similar scene from Man of Steel is intentionally exclusionary. This is not George Reeves' Daily Planet, and you would be wrong in viewing it that way. Over in 25, by the time David Cornsweet and Rachel Brosnahan welcome us into their private relationship, we've already been introduced to the Daily Planet in all of its classical glory, providing the audience with not one, but two comic book accurate interpretations in the same movie. One pre and the other post 1990s narrative shift. So while this reads as a loving olive branch to the fan base, this feels at best like a grudging capitulation, and at worst, another in a long string of fuck yous. You can have your Clark Kent, but you're not getting anything else. No love triangle, no professional rivalry, and as for the wink at the audience trope, this scene doesn't just subvert it, it perverts it. This beloved convention, rich with decades of subtext, serves a specific story beat that, I'll let Mark Hamill, TV's Luke Skywalker, explain it further.
And it was like breaking the fourth wall. Ooh, we know. Nobody else knows, just us.
So when these two dum-dums gape vacuously at one another after shitting all over the legend for 2 hours, it isn't a fourth wall break, it's a fourth wall reinforcement. You aren't Superman's co-conspirator anymore. Amy Adams is, and you're just supposed to sit there and take it. Also, don't fool yourself. There is a very specific reason that Henry Cavill is outed to Amy Adams 2 scenes before there's a Superman, and nearly a whole movie before Clark Kent is allowed to make a cameo in his own film. And it has nothing whatsoever to do with feminism. Lois Lane has been a feminist icon since the 1930s. But you know who has always been more feminine than her? The bespectacled, swooning, fainting Clark Kent. And there is no fucking way that Zack Snyder is letting his jacked up hunk of a leading man play that diminished role. Which is why Clark Kent only appears for the last fleeting seconds of the best Superman movie ever. So there's this meme that's been making the rounds lately. If you're watching this video right now, you're no doubt in the community of people who have seen it. But if not, here it is. This panel from a classic Superman comic is being circulated by snotty Snyder fans everywhere in an attempt to justify their fucked up version of Jonathan Kent. Of course, it should come as a surprise to exactly nobody that it in fact proves the opposite. But I'll play their little game. To their credit, this line of dialogue, which takes up only about 30% of the written information on the page, does, in fact, show Mr. Kent fretting over young Clark's secret. But here's the thing about that. Nobody is disputing that this is part of the character's personality. Full disclosure. In practically every version of the story I'm familiar with, Clark's dad is shown protecting his adopted son from the men in white coats. On Smallville, John Snyder spent the better part of his series arc reconciling these worries with Tom Welling's emerging heroism. Even on Lois and Clark, the safest of all the Superman stories, Old Man Kent pays lip service to these fears all the time. And in the Donner films, arguably the most iconic version of this conversation ever put to film, Glenn Ford famously says this.
When you first came to us, we thought that people would come and take you away because when they found out, the things you could do, and that worried us a lot.
Which proves nothing, save for the fact that the average Snyder bro can't read. Because seconds later, he more famously says this.
And there's one thing I do know, son, and that is you are here for a reason.
A sentiment that is mirrored almost verbatim in the very meme that's meant to prove their point. This moral, that Clark will someday have to use his powers in service to humanity, is actually the point of this panel. And it isn't even hinted at in Man of Steel, replaced instead by a stern daddy figure willing to sacrifice both his life and that of other people's children if it means never having to admit when he's wrong. And this is all based on a random, unrelated comic from 100 years ago. When you compare this infamous scene with this one from Superman for All Seasons, which the filmmakers themselves claim to be its inspiration, you'll find two scenes that, while very similar visually, are thematically divergent to the nth degree. While the film presents a stoic father needlessly martyring himself, widowing his wife, and traumatizing his son, the comic gives us two loving parents beaming with pride when their boy openly uses his gifts to protect their neighbors in their time of need. They took this scene of hope and community and sacrifice and turned it into one of cynicism and paranoia and selfishness. Because in this movie, the Kents were never meant to inspire Superman's heroism. They were meant to be an obstacle to it, a lingering influence for the character to overcome in his journey of self-discovery. An interesting deconstruction to be sure, but a deconstructed Superman story does not a Superman movie make. But while Jonathan and Martha have always been the impetus for Superman's hero journey, you know who never was? This guy right here. Never. Not ever. Not in the comics, where he's barely more than a plot starter, or the TV shows, where he's barely more than a plot starter, or the award-winning animated series, where he's barely more than a plot starter. Not even on Smallville, where he's like 10 different things as the show recycles its elements over and over again, are any of them all that particularly heroic. In fact, the concept of the benevolent Sky Daddy sending us his messianic space baby for protection and inspiration is largely a construct of the 1978 film. It was pretty rad at the time, but it has no precedent in any other media. So, in 25, when Bradley Cooper does this,
the people there are simple and profoundly confused, lord over the planet as the last son of Krypton.
It's no more or less a plot contrivance than 12 years earlier when Russell Crowe did this.
Send them back to the Phantom Zone.
How?
I ton, you could teach a cow.
Unless you take into consideration that he looks and sounds more convincing when he does it. But that's pretty much par for the course at this point. So, while this interpretation in James Gunn's film may read as a character assassination to some, it doesn't hold a fucking candle to the blatant audacity of this scene by Zack Snyder. And the people who claim that it does aren't fooling anybody, least of all themselves. Alright, for realsies here, guys. Man of Steel isn't the worst Superman movie ever. That would be Superman 4. And not every part of it jumps the shark. Though traditionally he doesn't kill, for a movie, it could be a very compelling story point to watch Clark fall apart after taking that action. This would have played beautifully in a future James Gunn movie. After seeing the character's compassion and optimism, this type of anguish and moral compromise would make for a gripping scene. But what does it matter here? The story doesn't establish any aversion to killing, and I have no reason to imagine that Zack Snyder's Superman wouldn't kill his enemies, as evidenced by the fact that Zack Snyder's Superman does kill his enemy. Likewise, Superman 25 isn't the best we could ever get. The suit for one leaves a little to be desired. But proving that the Corn Sweat costume is better than the Cavill's is as easy as this. However, the way I feel about the Superman 25 costume is exactly how I feel about just about every aspect of the Man of Steel. Why can't they just do it right? And that there is the point all over again. Doing it right. At the end of the day, James Gunn went out of his way to put as much Superman into his Superman movie as he could, and Zack Snyder put in only as much as absolutely had to. So as a fan, I prefer the movie that's got Krypto and Supergirl in it over the one that doesn't even feature a Clark Kent. Whether you like what you seen here, or it made you all poopy in the pants, you know where you can stick it. In the comments section below. And don't forget to like and subscribe and share it with all your friends, so's we can piss those guys off too.